Hello and welcome everybody to today's episode of the JBA All In Podcast.
Our podcast is currently streaming on Podbean and YouTube. The JBA All In Podcast is your one-stop sports shop podcast for news around the sports world.
My name is Jack.
My name is Brendan.
We're very excited to bring you today's Fantasy Football Frenzy special with fantasy football guru John Collins. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, guys.
All right, I think we'll just jump right into it. We do want to cover a little bit of a question before we get started. So we know the NFL did cancel the preseason for the 2020 NFL season, which is a bummer. But John, what effect do you think this has in terms of evaluating players who are either rookies joining the NFL or players who are moving into a new team via trade or free agency, whatever? How do you think this affects how well you can evaluate might play in this upcoming season in fantasy or in just in real life?
Right. Well, first of all, again, thanks for having me, guys. Kudos to you guys and what you're doing. I really appreciate being on today. To your point, Brendan, it's totally different. First of all, fantasy's back, so that's outstanding. We need fantasy football in our lives. Sports is better in our lives. But yeah, it's so difficult because there's no preseason games, right? And in terms of rookies, guys that have transferred to new teams, I can't imagine how difficult it would be. I mean, who knows who's going to adapt? But with no preseason games, very little scrimmaging, especially in the off season, guys didn't get time together. They didn't get face time. Will they be up to speed? So I would think personally that the veterans and guys with experience will have an advantage. Again, that's not to say shy away from the rookies, but I believe it's going to be a challenge for the rookies to get up to speed right away and get up to games time speed.
Jack, what are your thoughts?
And since you're a Colts fan, you've been watching the Colts training camp. I've been watching the Chargers training camp a lot, especially on their Instagram page. I don't know if all teams do this, but the Chargers too have a phenomenal social media team. They post a lot of highlights in their training camp, and obviously they're only going to post the good stuff. They're not going to post some guy messing up in training camp, but it's really good to see because you could see how a player is playing and how a player is progressing, especially the younger guys, because you guys were saying the veterans won't really have a problem with this, but rookies, in my opinion, do. Or they'd say this is a big hit on rookies because I use preseason to evaluate them a lot, and this is mostly for fantasy, and they also need the playing time. They need to get used to it, and I don't think scrimmaging against your team is the same thing as scrimmaging against another team because you're probably not going 100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you're going to be going for softer tackles. You're pretty much having fun with it. And obviously, you're always going to want to have fun when you're playing football. It's a game, but it's not as competitive and you can't take it as seriously. So I think it's going to be tough to evaluate rookies and stuff and such, and especially players on new teams like Melvin Gordon. I haven't been able to see any Broncos training camp, so I don't know how he's going to or what he's going to perform or how he's going to perform. So I can't evaluate him. I don't know if I want him on my fantasy team or not because sure I saw him play when he was in a Charger uniform, but he's got an entire new playbook. He's sharing carries with a player like Phillip Lindsay, so you never know how he's going to perform. So I think it's just tough. It's tough for rookies to get better for football, but it's tough for fantasy football fans and players to really know if a player is going to perform well on their team.
Right. I just wanted to. That's a great point. We had talked about it the other day, Brendan. There's opt-outs, right? We haven't even talked about that. There's, Damian Williams. Not a lot of big names in terms of the main positions in fantasy, but there's a lot of linemen. There's a lot of defensive linemen, offensive linemen, DBs, guys that are opting out. They're going to change a lot of the dynamic. So I guess my point here is that this is a year to really kind of check out what's going on a day-to-day basis in the first couple of games, just to see what happens in terms of teams meshing, and you'll see a lot. But again, this is a year to really keep eyes on a day-to-day basis.
Let's move into our next segment. We're each going to name our two favorite sleeper picks this year in fantasy drafts. We're going to be covering PPR scoring, since that is the most common way of fantasy football scoring, and 12-man league, since that's also the most popular amount of players in the league. So if we mention a certain round we think they should go in, know that we're thinking 12-man league, so 12 picks per round. So we'll each go around and we'll each say one of our sleepers and we'll talk about them, and then we'll go around a second time and say our second sleeper. So I'll start for my first sleeper. My first sleeper for the 2020 fantasy football season is going to be Anthony Miller of the Chicago Bears. Anthony Miller of the Chicago Bears last year was projected to kind of be a potential breakout after he showed some promise at the end of the 2018 season, but he did not necessarily live up to the hype as much as people would have hoped. But I think this year that could turn around. Last year, he had 656 yards for 2 touchdowns on 52 receptions on 85 targets. We've seen his production slowly trend upward in his first 2 seasons. We saw him go from 33 receptions and 423 yards to 52 receptions and 656 yards. The one main difference, though, is in his rookie season, he scored 7 touchdowns, and last year he only scored 2. The reason why I think this year Anthony Miller could be a potential sleeper is he has an ADP of around 139-ish, which I think is a great slot you get him because he's going to be the number 2 guy right now for Chicago. Last year, Taylor Gabriel was that number 2 guy behind Allen Robinson, but this year Taylor Gabriel is not going to be playing in Chicago, so I think that Anthony Miller is going to step right into that number 2 spot. I think that last year he may not have looked for the hype because he was not able to get as many opportunities as people may have hoped. So I think this year he'll hopefully be getting a lot more opportunities. I think Nick Foles would probably be the best option for him. Mitchell Trubisky, poor quarterback play has caused his production to not really show how good he actually is, in my opinion. So I think if Nick Foles wins that starting job in Chicago, Anthony Miller could have a really good fantasy season this year. I would personally pick him up as a potential guy to step in for maybe a starting receiver who's on bye. He could definitely get you, maybe 13 points one week. Jack, what is one of your sleeper picks?
I think my biggest sleeper pick is going to be Will Fuller. He is now wide receiver 1 on the Texans. Last season, Fuller was targeted 116 times. And in 18 games over the last 2 seasons, he held in 81 passes for 1,173 yards and 7 touchdowns. And obviously, he's going to get a lot more targets now that he's wide receiver 1. And he's a skilled player. He's dealt with injuries in his career, and he hasn't necessarily lived up to his hype and what he was supposed to be. But I think this is really his year to break out. He usually goes at pick 82. So if you're in need of a wide receiver, another wide receiver in the later rounds, he's a great pickup because Will Fuller is going to score points this season. He's going to get you points, and, I think that people are just sleeping on him. I don't think he should be anywhere near 82. I don't think he's a top 5 wide receiver, but he's going to be the main wide receiver for the Texans, and, I really think this could be his year.
I like it. I think you said it too, the injury thing with Will Fuller, but you talk about a guy that could just strike in a moment's notice, deep threat. He's got a great quarterback. He is set up for a prime year. I love it.
I also think that, Brandon Cooks also kind of deals with injuries a little bit. And if Brandon Cooks could potentially go down this season with an injury, and that make Will Fuller the clear-cut number 1 by miles. I think that, if Brandon Cooks goes down and you got Will Fuller on your team, that's a great sign for you. He could be a really good, solid starter for you the rest of the season.
I love it. And on the other side of that, Brendan, though, like Brandon Cooks, I'm not a big Brandon Cooks fan, but he runs good routes. So in some way, like if he's running good routes and he's the number 1, that might open up things, for Fuller. So it goes both ways. I hear you. Like if he's the number 1 targeted guy, but if Cooks can take away part of the field and you can get Fuller, one-on-one, that might add to it. Just want to throw that out.
John, who is one of your sleeper picks this year?
I'm going with a guy that was undrafted last year, DJ Chark. He is a wide receiver 22, ADP around 58, 6th round. I just love this guy. I was all over D.D. Westbrook last year. It was one of my big picks that I proclaimed that failed. Out of nowhere, here was this guy Chark who shocked the league. 73 receptions, 1,008 yards, 8 TDs in 15 games. That was with a lot of QB inconsistency, with Foles getting hurt early on. Him and Minshew, seem to have a bond. And I just think this guy, if I can get him in the 6th round, I'll do cartwheels and somersaults. Would love to have it. That's this. We're talking about wide receivers, right? And all the depth and all these sleepers. I think you wait on wide receivers this year. So I think he's smooth. He runs great routes. Loves to go deep. He's always going to get like 7, 8, or 9 targets. So that's my guy.
I like it. Chark's definitely a very young player. He's gonna have very good production for years to come for the Jaguars. I think we go around for second sleeper now. My second sleeper is Laviska Shenault for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Laviska Shenault was drafted in the second round for the Jacksonville Jaguars. This draft, he's a rookie going this year. I kind of wanted the Colts to draft him in this most recent draft. I thought he would have been a great addition, but looking back on their pick, Michael Pittman seems like the better fit, being the big guy. T.Y. Hilton could be his new Keenan Allen, and Michael Pittman his new Mike Williams. I think Michael Pittman was a great fit now, but I still think Laviska Shenault is a very talented receiver. I think the Jacksonville Jaguars got a very good player in him. He has an ADP of around 188, so he's a guy who could potentially not even get drafted in some leagues. And I think if you can claim him off the waivers, I definitely would. And also if you can get him late round, in like 13th, 14th round, that's a big steal for me. This guy, he's gonna be great. Gardner Minshew, we know he doesn't have the biggest arm. The way he plays, he doesn't throw deep that much, and that just fits Laviska Shenault's play style perfectly. Laviska Shenault's a run after catch player. He catches the ball and he uses that speed and power to just absolutely mow over people. And he'll, if you watch his college highlights, he catches the ball and he just goes. It's like you can't arm tackle him. You have to get like 2 bodies on him if he's going full speed. So he's battling it out for for a starting spot with guys like Westbrook and Conley. I think Westbrook is probably going to take that slot spot, but really Shenault or Conley could really take that second wideout spot. And I think if he takes that second wideout spot alongside DJ Chark, he could definitely have some big production because he's probably going to go unnoticed by some people in fantasy drafts, and you might be able to pick him up late. And he's a guy who I'm not predicting that he's going to break out the season, but I wouldn't be surprised if he becomes the second best, if not best, receiver on the Jaguars this season.
I love it.
Jack, what about you? Who's your second sleeper pick?
Okay, so I don't necessarily think this guy's a sleeper, but I think he's underappreciated. And, it may be a little biased. Brendan, you probably already know who I'm going to say. But my second choice is going to be Austin Eckler. In the beginning of last season, Melvin Gordon held out with a contract dispute, and Austin Eckler came in immediately, and he was a breakout player. He wasn't necessarily a star, but he was very solid for the Chargers. Last season, in 16 games, he had 132 rushes for 557 yards and 3 touchdowns. You may think, oh, that's not that impressive, but when you look at his receiving stats, he had 92 receptions for 993 yards and 8 touchdowns. So Austin Eckler can run the ball, and he could especially catch the ball. He's an amazing receiver, and he's a decent running back too. So I think, because I've seen him go as early, if you look at the statistics, as early as like pick 7. And I think at the latest, probably around 72, which I think is just crazy because Austin Eckler will be sharing carries with Justin Jackson and also Joshua Kelly, who they picked up in this year's draft, which is a phenomenal player. In my opinion, he's a phenomenal player. He's pretty underrated. But, Austin Eckler is going to be getting the majority of the carries, and he's going to be getting a lot of receptions this season. So he probably shouldn't be your first running back that you draft. Well, he could be if you're one of the later picks in the first round, but just don't sleep on Austin Eckler. He's gonna get picked first, second, third round, but he's gonna be a really solid player. So if you have him, you should be starting him because he's a solid player. He's gonna get a lot of carries and he's gonna get a lot of receptions.
Yeah, based on his ADP, he's currently going around mid-second round to late second round. Which I think it's a good spot for him. There's a couple guys who I think are. Who I think are ahead of him, who I'd put him over them. But I do think that he should definitely be a guy who you can pick up as either your second running back or your first running back, depending on whether or not you pick your receiver in the first round. As in the second round, I think I wouldn't pick him in the first round personally, but I would pick him in the second round if he's there for you. And and there's not really like a maybe like a Josh Jacobs or a Miles Sanders there for you, I'd definitely pick him up. And then if you can get him in the third round, that's a guarantee. Definitely, no matter who else is there, I take Austin Eckler. He's still in the third round or reaching the first round. Second round is kind of the spot for me to take him.
I agree. I'd even take him at 12 or 13 if I had that position. Last year, he had 6, 7, 8 weeks where he was literally a top 3 back. He helped me win a fantasy championship last year. You talked about his receptions. He's going to be the bell cow. There's no more Melvin Gordon, bringing him back and dealing with all his injuries and drama. It's not a concern, but, we have Tyrod Taylor coming in for Phillip. Hopefully they build a rapport. But I like Tyrod. I think he's going to make stuff happen. We know he's got a rookie waiting in the wings, but I think they're going to be very productive on offense and defense. So I love Eckler. I just hope he can stay healthy and they don't run him into the ground.
I agree. John, who is your final sleeper pick?
Final sleeper. Can't believe I'm going to say this. Jared Goff of your Los Angeles Rams. Jack, I was a Ram fan, very diehard Ram fan back in 80s and 90s, even the 70s. Anyways, the Rams left us in 1994 and took off, and I still haven't recovered. Even when they've come back, I still haven't embraced them. So too much information. But Jared Goff, 2 years removed from a Super Bowl, 32 touchdowns, 4,600 yards. Last year, they struggled. They probably had a little Super Bowl hangover. The whole Todd Gurley thing, is he healthy or not, was a big problem. Goff struggled a little bit, still had 22 touchdowns, 4,600 yards. I just think their new draft picks with Akers, Brown, and Henderson, they're going to figure out a way to work that running game, which they need, that misdirection, play action pass. The receivers, they drafted Van Jefferson. He's a great route runner. No one talks about Cooper Kupp, but he's just the number one receiver constantly. Robert Woods, you got Higbee rising, you got Everett. I'm on board, man. I think Goff is going to have a monster year. I'm going for 30 touchdowns, another 4,600 yards, and and again, he's going in the 130, going in the 10th round. I'm on board.
All right, that's going to wrap up our sleeper picks. Let's move into our 2 bust picks. Our 2 picks that we think will bust this year. I'll start with my first bust. My first bust is Rob Gronkowski. Now, Gronk, obviously, in his time with the Patriots, was a great tight end. He's one of the greatest tight ends ever to play the game, but he hasn't played football for an entire year. Also, he was even showing signs of decline over the last couple of years in New England. I get the connection with Tom Brady, also in Tampa. The Tampa's probably going to be using a 2 tight end personnel with O.J. Howard and Gronk. I feel like O.J. Howard is the better guy. He'll probably be getting more of the targets there. So I think that's another reason why Gronk maybe shouldn't be going around where he might be going. Gronk is normally around 81 is his ADP. That's around late 7th round, which Gronk, I'd take him if you can get him in late 8th, 9th round, but I wouldn't take him in the 7th round because, if you're not going to get one of those top 4 tight ends, who in my opinion are Kelsey, Kittle, Andrews, and Ertz, the production then falls down. But there's a lot of guys I'd put ahead of Gronk, guys like Tyler Higbee, Darren Waller, Evan Engram, Hunter Henry are all guys I definitely take over Gronk. And there's a lot more too, but I don't want to be sitting here for a while just naming tight ends. I just think, an ADP of 81 is just too rich for me. He hasn't played an entire season with no injuries, a full 16 games. He's not played a full season since 2011. That's dangerous, to that risk of injury there. And especially because he hasn't played football in a year, that'll up the injury concern for me. And he's going to have even less time to get into football shape this offseason. It's just to have him to rely on him to be your number 1 tight end for me it's just too much of a stretch for me. I feel like you could maybe take him as your backup, but I feel like you might want to have a second option in the waivers if he does end up busting like I think he will.
I totally agree with you. He is a talented guy. He's coming back with Brady. Obviously, that was a huge part of him coming back. He's still a great blocking tight end. Apparently, he's in shape and looking good. But they got O.J. Howard and Cameron Brate, I believe, still, right? And a lot of weapons that Brady wants to use. So I think he'll be effective. But, yeah, I don't think he's going to be a fantasy monster by any means. If you can get him as a backup and maybe stream him, I think that'd be a great call.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing though that I mentioned was the fact he hasn't played a full season in 2011, which that just concerns me, especially with the shortened off season and him not playing football for a year. So it just concerns me too much for me to feel safe picking him as my starting tight end. Jack, who is your number one bust candidate this year?
My number one bust candidate this year was Sony Michel. He's going to be sharing carries with James White, and he just came off foot surgery in the off season. I think this is just a really risky pick. So he goes in later rounds, like 6th or 7th round. So he's not like gonna be one of your main running backs, but I think if you do pick him up, that's just a really risky move. Because again, he's coming off foot surgery, he's sharing carries, and he just hasn't been stellar the past few seasons. He's sharing carries with James White. I think that's another risky pick too, but I think Brendan chose him for one of his sleepers, so I won't get into that. But I think it just is a risky pick overall, and I would stay away.
I agree. I can't trust that New England offense right now.
Definitely.
You lose one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. But you lose Tom Brady and the leadership. We'll see. They're going to figure it out, but it's going to take a while. I don't want anything to do with New England beyond their defense. So
I think it's just going to be tough for Cam because the way Tom Brady and Cam play are so different. Tom's a guy, he gets the ball within 2 seconds, it's out on a quick route to Edelman or a guy like that. But Cam, he's a guy who he moves around the pocket, he scrambles with the ball. Like, I just don't know if the offense will be able to adapt to Cam's play style. We'll see. But if I had to predict, I'd say that Cam is going to struggle this year. John, who is your first bust pick?
My first bust pick. Never liked this guy, even though he's got a lot of ability. It's Leonard Fournette, Jaguars. I'm just not sure what it is about this guy. He's been very fantasy relevant. He's been injured. There were some trade rumors earlier in the year. Last year, 2019, he had 1,152 yards, only 3 touchdowns. Very impressive 76 receptions for 522 yards, but no TDs. What concerns me is they also drafted Chris Thompson. Remember, traded for him, signed him, and he's an outstanding receiver out of the backfield. So I feel like they're trying to take away some of his, workload just to keep him fresh. So I believe his receptions will go down. I don't know. I just don't trust Fournette. I don't know what it is. His ADP is around 28. It just seems really high. I'll pass on him. I wouldn't take him in the 5th round. They're so unpredictable in Jacksonville right now. I want to stick with the receivers. I know you have to run the ball, but I'm going to move on from Fournette.
Personally, I think, you said you wouldn't pick him in the 5th round. I'd take him 5th round. His draft position being in the 3rd round, depends on who's there in the 3rd round for me, whether or not I would take him in that 3rd round. If there's other guys available for me that I want over him, I'll definitely pick them, but it depends, like I said, just depends on who's there. But really, I feel like a 4th round would be ideal for me, for Fournette, at least for me. Fournette, he's definitely really talented, like you mentioned that, but you also said just there's a little bit of a risk and unpredictability coming with picking Fournette.
I'm with Brendan. I'd probably pick him around the 5th round, maybe later, but I think there's a chance that he could be a fantasy bust this season, so I wouldn't really trust it. I don't really trust him that much.
Yeah. I think we're moving to our second bust now. I will go first with my second bust. My second bust is running back for the New England Patriots, James White. So, Jack, you and I, we each had Patriots running backs as our busts. Pretty interesting there. Obviously you mentioned that they're going to be sharing carries. That's one thing, but James White's ADP is 78. So that's pretty much smack dab in the middle of the 6th round there, or 7th round there, excuse me. And I think that for me, I would not take him in the 7th round unless like people are going crazy with the running backs. He's my last option because yes, he's a threat. Catching the ball. He's definitely a very good receiving back. Last year, he had 72 receptions for 645 yards and 5 TDs. But in terms of rushing, I just can't rely on him. Last year, he had 263 rushing yards and 1 touchdown. It's just he disappointed in the rushing game. Like, he's a running back. Like, I feel like he'd be better suited to play receiver at this point. He had only 6 total touchdowns as well, which it's not a terrible amount, but if I'm picking the 7th round, I'm probably picking a guy who could potentially be my flex, and I feel like there's guys who will probably be sitting around there that I could take that will end up giving me more production around that 6th round. I take a guy like Michael Gallup there. Another running back I could take potentially around that time would be Ronald Jones, who I think will be better than James White. I just think there's I'm not trying to hate on James White in any way. I just feel like in the 7th round there, when I'm kind of drafting my flex, there's just too many guys who I'd take over him there for me to really consider drafting him there.
I agree with you. Again, I'm staying away from New England. Brady loved James White out of the backfield. Great with receptions. Just doesn't get a ton of carries. He's had moments though. I think it was a couple of years ago, but he was almost RB number 1 because he had so many receptions. He scored a handful of touchdowns. So, but no, I'm not. I'm passing on him. If I can get him 10th round maybe, but you're right. There's just not a lot of excitement, and I don't know if I can trust Cam getting in the ball.
Yeah, I agree on that spot. 10th round sounds about right. Jack, who is your second bust pick?
My second bust pick is going to be Melvin Gordon. So the reason why I have him up here is, first, he's had pretty bad injuries in the past. He had a knee tear in 2015 and a knee PCL sprain in 2016, which isn't looking so good. But that's not one of my main concerns. My main concern is he's switching teams. He's got a new playbook. He's going to be sharing carries with Philip Lindsay. Obviously, Melvin Gordon's going to be running back number 1. I think he's a better player than Philip Lindsay, but I think they're still going to give him some carries. And overall, I just don't really trust Melvin Gordon. I wouldn't pick him up. He's kind of fumble prone. It's just, I just kind of have a feeling that he's going to have a down year, especially not playing that much last year and not doing as well as Austin Eckler when he did play, because Austin Eckler looked amazing last year. He just came out of nowhere, and Melvin Gordon didn't look like the Melvin Gordon that we'd seen in the past, and it was really disappointing. So I just have a feeling in my heart that Melvin Gordon's having a down season. I would only pick him up if it's in the later rounds, and I already have my main running backs, or have 2 or 3 running backs or 2 running backs, because I don't really trust them on the Broncos. I think they're probably going to be passing the ball more than they're running with their additions in the draft, and with their plays getting better overall. So I think they're more of a passing team, and I think that Melvin Gordon's just not going to have an amazing season.
I agree. Like you said, Denver's going to throw the ball. Their 2 rookie wide receivers, Cortland Sutton, Noah Fant. To your point, Lindsey, I think Lindsey's just as good as Gordon. I think it's a 2-headed monster in the backfield. Lindsey's an incredible runner. I just think it's durability with both those guys. So I just kind of see a split backfield, play the hot hand. Gordon may be 60-40, but Lindsey, that's another type of sleeper. So I agree with you.
Yeah, Lindsey was a pro running back in his first year in the NFL. I definitely think that Denver would be more of a passing team this year. There's a lot of hype surrounding Drew Lock, Cortland Sutton, Noah Fant, Jerry Jeudy. There's a lot. Denver fans, the Denver organization, are hyping up Drew Lock a lot and Cortland Sutton, and they're hyping him up to be, a dynamic duo this year. Drew Lock, they're hyping him up to be a legitimate, solid starting quarterback this year. So if this is true, and they're actually gonna, and these guys are what they say, then I think that this team would definitely be passing the ball a lot more, and they're going to be running it less, and this will decrease Melvin Gordon's production a lot. So I agree with you. I wouldn't trust Melvin Gordon as a starter. I think I'd potentially take him as a backup who could replace one of my guys for a week or so if they go down with an injury or a bye week, etc. That's pretty much it. I wouldn't take him really. I wouldn't trust him as a starter unless I was desperate for a second running back. But John, who is your final bust pick?
Mr. Le'Veon Le'Veon Bell. I was a big Le'Veon fan when he was with Pittsburgh, and all he's been is drama over the last period of time. He held out for a season, finally got traded with all his demands. We know his ability. He's one of the best pass catchers. His funky running style, his hop steps. He can do it all, but he's not in a great situation. Right now, his ADP is 37. Geez, end of the third. Last year, they were in chaos. We know the Darnold rookie quarterback was up and down. Le'Veon had 789 yards and 3 TDs, 66 receptions, which we know he can do with 460 yards and 1 TD. I mean, third round, how much better can you expect him to be? Report of a tight hamstring right now. How good can this offense be? I like Herndon at tight end. They got Brashad Perryman. They got Crowder, but it's just kind of bland. So I like the Jets. I want to root for them, but I just don't see how Le'Veon can be a number 2, if not a number 1 for some people that may draft a quarterback and receiver. I'm going to pass on him. Again, I wouldn't take him till the 5th. If somehow he's sitting around there at the 5th, fine. But beyond that, I just don't see him excelling too much more.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I also, I'm not a big fan of Le'Veon Bell going into this season either. Jack, do you have any thoughts?
I think you guys covered it again. I've always liked Le'Veon, but I think his play has gone down with the Jets, and I think if he's gonna go back to how he was playing before, he needs to do it this season. He really needs to have an up season because I want Le'Veon to succeed. I want the Jets to succeed. They're always an underdog, but it's not looking good. It's not looking so good for them. It's not looking so good for Le'Veon. So if he really wants to get back to his level of play and his level of hype, he needs to have a good season.
He's just not the same Le'Veon that he was in Pittsburgh. That's just the fact that matters. So people can't expect him to be the same Le'Veon that he was in Pittsburgh. So
keep an eye on him, though. Keep an eye on him. He's very talented, and there's some people that are saying the Jets are going to get him in gear. So again, he has some upside, but I'm just not going to take that risk.
All right. I think now it's time to move into our top 5 players at each of the main fantasy positions: quarterback, running back, wide receiver. I say we'll just start with quarterback. The commander-in-chief of all of the teams for every team in the NFL. Quarterbacks generate a lot of fantasy points, but they're normally this second or third position to start getting drafted off the board. I'll go first with my top 5 QBs.
Rumble, please.
Number 1 for me is Patrick Mahomes. He's kind of it's easy. The consensus. Number 2 is Lamar. He's a great fantasy quarterback. Number 3 is Russell Wilson. He's always, he's always leading his team. Gets lots of passing opportunities. Russell Wilson's great. Number 4 for me is Drew Brees. Drew Brees is my pick to win MVP this season. And my Saints are my pick to win the Super Bowl. And then Alvin Kamara is my pick to win Offensive Player of the Year. I'll talk about him a little bit later in a later segment. Yes, I'm going all on the Saints this year. They've had, heartbreaking playoff exits the past 3 years with the Minneapolis Miracle, the Rams overtime loss, and the Vikings overtime loss recently. They barely lost the second seed to the Packers last year. I think this year they could easily be the 1 or 2 seed behind either the 49ers or just being the 1 seed themselves. The Saints, they have, if you think about it, they got one of the best quarterbacks in the league. They got one of the best running backs in the league. They got one of the best receivers in the league. They have one of the best offensive lines in the league. And they have, I'm not going to say they have one of the best defenses in the league, because when I say one of the best, I'm thinking maybe like top 5-ish or something. But they're still I'd say they're probably like a top 10 defense for me in what fantasy or just whatever. Doesn't matter. I think they're definitely a top 10 defense. They have an elite pass rusher in Cameron Jordan. They've also got an elite secondary player in Marshall Lattimore. And with additions like Janoris Jenkins and Malcolm Jenkins to the defense this offseason, their defense is going to be a lot better. So I'm really high on the safety tier, especially on Drew Brees. That's why I have him as my 4th fantasy quarterback. And number 5 for me is Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray is going to get a lot of opportunities for the Cardinals this year. He's throwing to D-Hop and Christian Kirk and Larry Fitzgerald. And he also can run the ball too. so we get some production out of that. Jack, who are your top 5 fantasy quarterbacks this year?
I'm gonna switch things up. I'm gonna go from 5 to 1, and with number 5, this is a pick that I don't think a lot of people agree with. I have Deshaun Watson. He lost a lot of pieces, but I still trust in him. He's a phenomenal quarterback. He can decently he's got legs. He can run the ball. So I don't think he should be your first choice, but I think if he's there when you need a quarterback, definitely take him. And number 4, you guys are probably gonna think I'm gonna say Kyler Murray, but I'm gonna say Russell Wilson. I don't think he's gonna have a down year by any means. I just think that there's 3 quarterbacks that will have a better year and have more fantasy points. And I could be wrong. This is just what I hope happens or what I think could happen. But Russell Wilson, like you said, he's always been a solid player. He's always led his team. He's a great leader. He can throw the ball. So I think Russell Wilson's a guy that if he's there, definitely take him. If Pat Mahomes and Lamar are gone, I would take Russell Wilson. But the guy I put ahead of him, kind of surprising to some, I put Kyler Murray. So I've always liked Kyler Murray. I saw his highlights in college. He's always been a great player. He's got legs, and now he has better running backs. You already covered, or not running back. I'm sorry, better. He has a better wide receiving core. I still don't think the Cardinals are going to be a great team by any means, but they definitely got better, especially with the addition of DeAndre Hopkins. So I think Kyler has someone to throw to now, because I think last season really he was doing it he was using his legs a lot more than I think he should, and now he could be a little more comfortable throwing the ball to these receivers. And I think just one more thing they need is an offensive line, because you don't want to see Kyler just sprinting away from the O-line because he's getting no blocking. So I think if he could play well, especially without help from his O-line, I think he could be an amazing fantasy quarterback. And number 1 and 2, I don't have to cover it. You could put Lamar at 1 and Pat Mahomes at 2, but in my opinion, Lamar second, Patrick Mahomes is first. Patrick Mahomes, to me, best player in the league, and Lamar, phenomenal player. He puts up a lot of fantasy points. One of the best I say second best fantasy quarterback, maybe even first when it comes to fantasy points. So I think these are the 2 players that you want. I've seen people pick him as early as the first round, which I don't really agree with, but that's not a terrible choice, because both of these players are going to put up a lot of fantasy points. They're both phenomenal players. So yeah, that's my top 5 quarterbacks.
I love it. He's not in my top 5, but he got D-Hop. Kenyon Drake is on fire. Sky's the limit on that team. But you talked about it, him running around all the time. You see how the offense holds up. But Fitzgerald and Hopkins, sky's the limit. Also, to your point, Jack, I agree 100%. Mahomes and Lamar, not so much as sure as Lamar, but first round. Hey man, if you get one of these guys on your team, you're relevant. You have a better shot to make the playoffs. You would have the number 1, 2, 3 guys in the league popping off big points, because there's plenty of weeks where your team struggles. But these guys put up so many points year in and year out in terms of top quarterbacks that they give you a shot to make the playoffs if you manage your team right. So I have no problem taking them first round, especially after the big 4 boppers. So to your guys' point, my top 5, Mahomes, enough said about him. He's fresh off the Super Bowl, and he's just kind of a freak of nature. My number 2 is a little surprise, Russell Wilson. He's just a stud. He's a leader extraordinaire. God, no one can sack the guy. He's running around with his head cut off, but he's making plays. He's arguably last year's fantasy MVP. I don't love their offense. They want to establish the ground game. I'm hoping Chris Carson will be someone I can get, but he's injury prone. But if they can run the ball, they're just that more dangerous. Lamar 3. I think there's going to be a slight regression with Lamar. There's just so much hype. He took the fantasy world by storm last year. Where did this come from? And he was incredible. But I think you give a year to some of these defensive coordinators. You got Pittsburgh Steelers. They're going to be a handful, especially on defense. Ben's going to be back. I just think the Lamar hype's going to tone down, even though I know they're a stacked roster. I think about him running a lot. 3 years ago, he used to talk about running quarterbacks. You weren't supposed to do that because you could get hurt. You want to get hit. And here he is, everyone's saying now, oh, yeah, you need a running quarterback. Go run wild. But, there's that risk with him because he does. He runs crazy and runs wild. But I don't love it in terms of like him being on my fantasy team. I'd rather him run a little bit, open up that play action pass, and make plays down the field. But running's part of it, and I want him to do well. I love him, but I'm just saying I'm dropping him a little bit. Number 4 for me is Dak Prescott. I was shocked to see that last year he had 30 touchdowns. Jeez. I'm not a huge Dallas guy, but Dak, all this contract drama, he's got Zeke Elliott, who is arguably a fantasy MVP this year, and with Gallup and Amari Cooper, they're loaded. We'll see with McCarthy. All of a sudden, McCarthy's not calling the plays. Like, why'd they bring him in? So that was a little surprise to me, but I think they're going to be a machine. I think this is their year to make the playoffs, go like 11-5, and do very well. So I like Dak. I don't think he gets enough credit. Oh, he doesn't throw the ball down the field enough. Well, I think they're going to figure it out. And then my guy, to your point, B-Dog, is Breeze. You were preaching to the choir. I think this is their last hurrah. So many weapons. Defense is going to be solid. He's just money, and he's always been a top 10 guy. I just like him this year, so I'm a little biased. There's a couple guys I might put a little higher than Breeze, but because they're winning the Super Bowl, and I'm proud you said that, I like him, and he's going to be a leader. Look for 32 touchdowns, 700 yards. He's got a lot of records still out there to get, so he's motivated, and I'm excited for the Saints boys.
Yeah, and your point about Dak was very interesting. I was thinking about putting him higher up, putting him at my 5 spot because he's definitely gonna be that offense is gonna be great this year. But at the same time, I don't think they're gonna be 11-5. I think they're gonna be more around 9-7, maybe 10-6. I don't know. I think the Eagles will still win that division. They were just like, even with how he statistically played relatively well last year, but in all, their team was just not good last year. They lost the division to a team that was 8-8. Like, come on, and that team was injury riddled all across their team, from the offense to the defense, and somehow this Cowboys team was able to lose the division to that team. So I think that they'll be contending for a wild card spot this year. I think the Eagles, barring injury, are the best team in that division. But the Cowboys definitely, they do stand a fighting chance against the Eagles, in my opinion. But I just think that, losing so many good players in that secondary, it'll definitely hurt them a lot. I think we move into top 5 running backs now. I'll go first. Number 1, the consensus number 1 overall pick is Christian McCaffrey. Of course, he's a dual threat, do-it-all player. He can do everything. He can run. He can catch. It's just hard to not have him. You can't have him not as the number 1 guy because he's going to be the number 1 guy on that offense. Teddy Bridgewater is going to rely on him to rush the ball, to catch the ball, and he's going to be great. He's going to be phenomenal. It's just he's hard to stop, and I think he's going to do great this season. Number 2 for me is a surprise, Alvin Kamara. I said offensive player of the year. I think he's going to be great this season. I think Drew Brees is going to be throwing it all over the park to Michael Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders, and especially Alvin Kamara. I think Alvin Kamara is going to get some good rushing stats, but he's also going to get amazing receiving stats, in my opinion. And then number 3 for me is Saquon Barkley. He's kind of a guy who I won't be surprised to see go number 1 in some fantasy drafts. I mean, I take Christian McCaffrey over him and Kamara over him, but I will be surprised if a guy like him went 1. And then Zeke for me is my number 4. I picked him with the 8th pick in my fantasy football league last year, and he was phenomenal. And I think it's only going to carry into this season. Number 5 for me is Dalvin Cook. You could make an argument that there could be other guys at this number 5 spot, but for me, he's number 5. He just absolutely carries the offense sometimes when he just gets in the zone. So I think he's my number 5 running back. That's it for my top 5 running backs.
Love it.
Jack, who are your top 5 running backs this season?
Okay, so at number 5, I have Dalvin Cook. You made a great point. I changed it from Derrick Henry to Dalvin Cook. It made me think. I think Derrick Henry's going to have a down year. I know you didn't talk about him, but it really made me think about my choice. he's probably not gonna be as good as he was last season. He was a beast last season, but I don't see how he could get any better, and I don't see how he could replicate that. I just think the Titans are a little overrated this season. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't go as far as they did last year. And I think it wasn't a fluke year for Derrick Henry. I think he's a phenomenal player, but I don't think he's going to replicate that this season. Number 4, I had Zeke. He's always been an amazing player. He always is a solid running back, easily top 5. But I think picking Zeke before someone like Christian McCaffrey, because I've seen this before. I've seen people pick Zeke over Christian McCaffrey, probably are Cowboys fans or something. I think that's just crazy, and I think there's 3 other running backs that are better than him, especially in fantasy. So I'm not saying Zeke is a bad player. I'd definitely pick him easily if he was there, but I think there's 3 above him, and at my 3rd pick, I have Alvin Kamara. I'm not as big on Kamara as you are. I'm not as big on the Saints, especially for fantasy. I don't really like Drew Brees for fantasy, but Kamara's phenomenal. He's going to be getting a lot of carries and a lot of receptions from Drew Brees. Number 2, I have Saquon, and obviously number 1, I have Christian McCaffrey. If you have the first pick and you don't pick Christian McCaffrey, you're crazy. I don't know what to tell you. He
Seriously.
puts up a lot of fantasy points. He's an amazing player, but he's number 1 in my book easily. Saquon, maybe, but I don't think he's as good. I think the only thing that could bring Christian McCaffrey down is an injury.
The great white hope, the greatest white running back of all time. And that's not even saying that much because I can't even come up with a bunch. Craig James, there was Merrill Hodge. Geez, like who is there? But CMC is a robot. I believe he's the second to have 1,000 rushing and 1,000 receiving. He's just ridiculous. So that's obvious. I think if you get any top 4 pick, you're good. They're all interchangeable here, so we can argue till the cows come home. But I'm on board with Kamara. But he's just too good, man. He had an off year last year. He was hurt. Said he played at 70%. Still was effective kind of down the stretch. Disappointed owners trying to get to the playoffs, but he did okay in the playoffs. This is it. I just think the Saints are going to rally around Breeze. They got just too much offensive weapons, too much frustration and anger, as you talked about earlier, Brendan, of their disappointing, the Rams and the Vikings, all these plays that devastate them. This is it. This is my last time on the Saints. So I love Kamara, love Thomas, love Breeze. I can understand how Breeze could kind of settle in and not be amazing, but he will control that offense. Number 3, I have Zeke here. Zeke just going off his last year. He had 1357. He had 12 TDs, 54 receptions. Again, I just think Dallas is going to be humming. Zeke is very steady, not too injury prone, even though he got dinged up before. But I like Dallas, and Zeke hammers it in there as good as anyone. The fact that he's a great receiver, I have him up there at 3. 4 is Saquon. Saquon could be 1, 2, 3, or 4. Guy's all world ability. I think injury concerns are at the top of my list. Daniel Jones hopefully will move the ball. There's a lot of talk about him looking good and being able to move that offense, which will only help Saquon. But I just get worried about overuse with him. But you talk about a guy that can take it to the house at any time and someone you feel comfortable watching every Sunday. It's Saquon. Number 5 is my sleeper 5, and that's Aaron Jones. Not sure why he's not getting a lot of love. He's like late first round, early second. Understand he shares carries with Williams, but last year, come on, he had 19 touchdowns. Is he going to do that again? No. But Green Bay is another team. It's not getting a lot of talk, not a love, but he's the main guy. He's 70%, 70-30 with Williams. He catches the ball, 48 receptions. So, I just like him a lot. I like that he's a big play guy in a good offense with a great quarterback.
All right, let's move into our top 5 wide receivers. I'll go first. My number 1 spot is Michael Thomas. He is just a beast. He gets so many receptions, so many opportunities. It's just hard for him not to be the number 1 guy. Number 2, Devontae Adams. I was between him and Julio for this one, but Adams, with that offense just performs better than the Falcons offense does. But who is my number 3 after that? And then DeAndre Hopkins is my number 4. I think he'll definitely be getting lots of opportunities in Arizona, being the number 1 guy. And then number 5 for me is Tyreek Hill. For me, it was Hill or Godwin, but in my opinion, just the Chiefs' high-powered offense, it's just gonna too many big plays are gonna come from Tyreek Hill that I just think I couldn't put Godwin over him. Godwin's more of a slot guy, and I also think that the Chiefs are going to be scoring a lot of points this year, and I think they're going to be one of the top teams in the league. Buccaneers, I think, are going to have to fight for a playoff spot this year. That might be an unpopular opinion. I just don't think, a 40-plus-year-old Tom Brady and then a Gronk who has said he's not going to return to his form will save the Buccaneers. Last year they weren't good at all, and this year just because when aging Tom Brady and a washed-up Gronk are coming in doesn't mean that they're going to be able to, contend for the Super Bowl. In my opinion, they're going to be entertained to watch. Definitely a lot of drama and hype. So we'll see. But this kind of reminds me of the Browns when Odell came to the Browns and people were like, "Oh my God, they're Super Bowl contenders! Wow!" And then they were terrible. It's like same thing here with the Buccaneers. They weren't good the year before, and they got one guy. And people are all of a sudden Super Bowl contenders. Granted, Odell and Tom Brady are 2 completely different players at 2 completely different positions. One way more important than the other. But still, I don't know how the offense will be able to adapt to his play style, or vice versa. Will he be able to adapt to the offense? Because Tom Brady in New England, he hands the ball off. He gets the ball out quick for short passes. In Tampa, what we saw Jameis last year is they didn't run the ball that much. They'd have him throw all over the field, and that's just not how Tom Brady really likes to play. We'll see if Bruce Arians can pull this off, though, and make them a Super Bowl contender. All props to him if he can make that happen. Jack, who are your top 5 wide receivers for this fantasy season?
I pretty much had the exact same list, except I personally would switch Tyreek Hill and DeAndre Hopkins. So I have DeAndre Hopkins at 5, Tyreek Hill at 4, Julio at 3, Devontae Adams at 2, and Michael Thomas at 1.
All right. Michael Thomas, enough said. The receptions are ridiculous. I wasn't a big Michael Thomas fan a couple years ago. He kind of blew my mind. I think Breeze helps with that a lot. He's so accurate and loves him. But I'm going to give him his props. I believe he set the all-time reception record. So
yeah, past my boy Marvin Harrison.
Number 1. Number 2, a little bit of a shocker, but I'm going to take the best receiver on the best offense for the best quarterback in the league, and that's Tyreek Hill. Tyreek, what was it, 2 years ago, 1,479 yards with 12 touchdowns. Had him on a championship team. Last year, I had him, and of course he gets hurt like the first game. Still does solid. I just think he's too explosive. I just question how determined will this team be. They just won the Super Bowl. They want to go back to back. Mahomes is just ridiculous. He can only get better. So I just love Tyreek Hill there. Number 3, I'm going to shock you a little bit. You guys, I'm going with Chris Godwin. I've been calling this guy for a couple of years now. Last year, I said he would be a breakout guy along with Galladay. I respectfully disagree, B-Dog, about Tampa Bay. I just think they're going to be a fun team. I think their defense is going to be solid. It's going to be a question of protection. But you got Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Their tight end trio. Even Ronald Jones is a nice sleeper. But I'm just telling you, Chris Godwin, you can book 100 receptions, 1,300 yards, and 12 TDs. He's only getting better. I don't know if this is his 3rd or 4th season, but he's just slowly breaking out. I think the sky's the limit. Brady, loved Edelman. He loves slot guys. I think he's going to be the red zone guy. I think Evans gets double teamed on the outside. You got to deal with the tight ends, and Brady's just going to love that. Number 4, I'll go to your Devontae Adams. He's just too talented. He's got too talented of a quarterback to ignore. My concern was, why did they not draft a receiver to complement? No, they took Jordan Love. So that bummed me out. I like Green Bay. I like Rodgers. As I told you, I love Aaron Jones. I was shocked. So they're basically saying, Rodgers, we're gonna plan for the future. We're not gonna help you with more weapons, which they needed. So I just get concerned that he'll get double teamed. I couldn't even tell you who's opposite him on the other side. So that's just my concern with him when I'm dropping him down. But of course, he can do anything. He's an incredible receiver, and you can count on Rodgers and him going nuts. And then my number 5 is another shocker, but I believe strongly. Ben Roethlisberger is back, and Mr. Juju Smith-Schuster is my number 5 guy. I think people sleep on them. Last year Ben was out, and they were just kind of a disaster all the way around. So he had no one throwing him the ball. But this year we talked about Deontay, Washington. They're going to have plenty of weapons. They're going to have a good running game. They're going to have a great defense. I just think Juju's going to explode. Again, 2 years ago, he was off the charts. Again, I think people are just sleeping on Pittsburgh and him. And I just can't wait to watch Pittsburgh move the ball down the field.
All right. Well, that, my friends, is going to wrap up today's episode of the JBA All-In Podcast. Hopefully you did enjoy. If you did enjoy, remember to show support by liking, subscribing, doing whatever. If you enjoyed, depending on what platform you're listening to us on, and in the comments, leave suggestions. Maybe you agree or disagree with what we talked about today. Let us know your opinion on stuff, and have a great day. We will see you in the next episode.